Guppy and Marsh should have picked out 50 photographs. We would have narrowed it down. We would have cut some out. When it was all said and done, after a number of hours of looking at photographs of someone that you've only had a chance of looking at for a second or two, we should have narrowed it down to about 10. The point was, we went for hours and hours. They looked at thousands of photographs, and they picked out 0, meaning that nobody looked even similar. I then, later on that evening, I conferred with some of our experts in that area who said that that would nearly be impossible. Somebody in those thousands of photographs had to look similar to the person who committed the crime. By them not picking out anyone, neither one of them picking out anyone, not just, it made no sense at all. And suspicions started to grow at that point. As the night wore on, with suspicions growing, I approached my captain and basically said, can I hammer these two? I mean, it was an expression we used. Get them back in here, split them up in rooms. Let's start interrogating them like criminals and see where it goes. Let's see if we can catch them in mistakes in their story and so on. I've done it hundreds and hundreds of times. It's not hard to do. I won't go into how it's done, but it's not hard to do. You can catch them in errors.
Yeah.
I was told, no way, back off, hands off. Unless you have proof positive evidence that they committed a crime, we are not going to interrogate them. We are not going to treat them like criminals. They're guests in our country, and they may be related to the royal family.
Yeah.
So
that worked well for them.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Our hands were tied. They went on their merry way a day later, but before doing so, my partner and I went back to their hotel room, and we just figured we'd give it one more try, and had them actually act out the scenario of what happened in the room, which they did for us. In Guppy's own autobiography describing this case, he said he felt uncomfortable at this point, that we were looking at him funny. We were. He went through it step by step, little details. But, hindsight is 20/20. The biggest thing, I think one of the first questions that I gave to him was, the person who robbed you, was he American? Was he from New York? And he said yes. He didn't have a British accent. We were hoping that maybe somebody had followed them from London. But then when he goes ahead and describes the particular words used by the perpetrator of the crime, they weren't American words. They weren't terms that Americans use, particularly New York Americans. And the one that stands out to me, that both Guppy and Marsh both said, and they both said separately in separate interviews, was that the perpetrator told them to lie on their front.
Yeah.
It's the first time I've ever heard that expression before. Lie on your front. We say lie face down. But not only did they both say it, and they both said it separately, they both then said it again, once again, during that next interview in the hotel room where they acted out the crime scene. Lie on your front. So that jumped out at my partner and I as this is not a New Yorker who committed the crime. It's not an American who committed the crime. There's something not right here. We went as far to then send a telex to Scotland Yard, asking them about Guppy and Marsh, explaining that they were here claiming to be victims of a robbery. Could they please look into their backgrounds for us and let us know a little bit more about them? Our reply, I believe, came 24 or 36 hours later. Again, with pre-PCs, using a telex, was that they were upstanding citizens of Great Britain. Basically hands off, they couldn't be lying. And we continued our investigation. There was a lot of smaller things done to try to trick Guppy at different points in time. I sent him, as a matter of fact, I mailed him a letter with photographs, what we call a photo array. It's illegal, or it's not acceptable in our courts for me to show you a photograph and say, is this the person? What I can do is I can, show you 6 photographs, yeah, and say, can you pick out the person? Yeah. In this case, I put 6 people in a photograph, all who fit the description of you, but one in particular who fit the description so much more than all the others. Was the right age, hair color, the entire thing. And he just happened to be a jewel thief. But he also happened to be in prison. And he had been in prison for 10 years or so. And in my letter to Guppy, I hinted that I knew it was this person, even though I knew it wasn't because he was in jail. Almost begging him to bite. Just take a little nibble of the bait and tell me, yeah, that might be him, and we can start to reel you in. But he didn't. I'll give him credit for that much. I think he later on said he would never pick out a photograph of anybody because no matter what he did, he would be found wrong. Who knows? But again, that's all. That's pieces of the story in the manuscript. There's so much more.
Well, there is, and we just talk about James Bond quickly because that telex was the subject that Bond was interested in, wasn't it? When this came back, when this resurfaced, yes. You had this contact with the British Embassy or Consulate, and
I don't remember which. I could find it, but
yeah. And they were initially in this telex. They were worried about this telex, weren't they?
Yes. This telex, as innocent as it was, tell us a little bit about Guppy and Marsh and who they were. It apparently became a focus at some point. My initial contact with, I call him James Bond. It's about the best way I can describe him. I don't remember his name. But he wanted to see that telex. He saw the telex. He pulled it out and he asked me if he could have it. I, of course, declined. Was more than happy to make a copy for him. I don't remember if he wanted the copy or not. And that was the end of it. And I didn't think too much about it. But months later, or weeks later at the time when members of Scotland Yard arrived, they were also going through my case folder, things that I had done, the interviews I conducted, and pulled out this telex once again. And once again, I was asked, can we have this? And again, I declined. I'll make you a copy, which I did. I made them a copy. And I started wondering, why does everybody want this telex?
Why do you think?
Nothing. It seemed innocent enough, but the question of the telex kept popping up. As a matter of fact, I won't go into speculation. There were other incidents where I pulled the telex back from certain people's files. Eventually, I transferred my entire case over to Scotland Yard. It just made more legal sense for them to try the case in London than it did here in New York. At that point, once the case was officially theirs, I turned over my case to them, which was probably a carton full of evidence and paperwork, along with that telex, for use at trial. Everything was supposed to be returned to me, and everything was. Literally thousands and thousands of pages of statements and documents and evidence were all returned to me, except one thing. That telex was gone. And now it seemed to not just be gone, but we don't have it anymore. We must have lost it. It wasn't important in the first place. it became a little more interesting as the trial wore on, or as the trial began and then wore on, as the NYPD was portrayed as being bumbling, about the best word I can think of. That we were fooled from the beginning. We had no clue that this, what we were doing.
Yeah.
Scotland Yard cracked the case, and that's where it ended. That telex would prove, to a point anyway, a small amount, that we weren't bumbling. Scotland Yard should have had wind of this case a year before they even got involved. If the person on the end of that answering that telex would have actually looked into what was going on over at Inca Gemstones, this thing may have come to light a lot sooner. But anyway, let's get away from this Guppy case.